Hello and welcome back to another episode of SYBI. Now, today, I know so far in this series we've reviewed entirely video games, but I'm actually moving away from video games for this episode, maybe only, depending on, how it's received. But today we're going to be reviewing a comic book. Now, I'm not a comic expert. I read a few Beanos when I was much younger, but again, that was years ago. But even though I don't think I have much expertise on the subject, we're going to be reviewing a comic called The Cave. It's the first comic I've read in a while. And even though I don't have much of a repertoire of knowledge on what a comic book should be, I'm going to be trying to approach this as sensibly as I can to give an accurate representation of how I feel about this book. So the comic is called The Cave, and it's actually written by two friends of mine, Jack Fowler and Ryan Deakin. Ryan has done the artwork for the book, but even though it is written by two friends of mine, I'm not going to let personal matters sway my opinion on this. I'm going to be unbiased, without prejudice. So, let's dive right into the cover and the general look and the general feel of the actual item here. So, first thing I gotta say, the paper's 100% recycled, which I know, is an important thing in this day and age. It doesn't feel flimsy, it doesn't feel like it's gonna tear when you're flicking through it. And I don't know if it's just me imagining it, but when I look at comic books in shops and stuff, they always feel very, thin. Really thin. My only complaint with the actual general construction of the book is that the paper curls over time. You might be able to see it over the course of this video. It curls over time, but you can just sandwich it between two flat things and for a few hours, and it'll go right back to normal. I'm not sure why that is. It's a very minor complaint. So the cover's set upon this very matte black cover. You've got the main character. I wouldn't say he's the main character anyway, but you've got the main focus of this cover right here, and then you've got the yellow lettering for the actual title of the comic. And as a reader, you're immediately drawn to these yellow letters and the white face and the red tie because they stand out quite clearly against this very harsh black background. There's also, I don't know if it'll pick up on the camera, but here there's what seems to be like an opening. Quite faintly behind this character. The words "It Begins" right at the bottom in all caps. Very eye-catching once again. And obviously the question begs, what is beginning? And even when you've read this issue, the answer to that question is not very open and shut. So there's definitely a sense of mystery already, even within the first issue of it. Also on the back, this is I really like this image. It's all monotone, but I don't know if it'll pick up again. But there's these really tall, long-legged characters with really small heads in this sort of desolate, barren wasteland that looks really fucking cool. I like this. Anyway, so I'm gonna go over the plot of this book now, and I would say if I had to give it a word, it would be abstract. And instead of giving a direct route into just what the cave is, the first issue actually sets up, in what I have gathered from it, it sets up 3 plot lines. Okay, so the 3 threads that it focuses on are as follows. 2 Arctic explorers trying to find something in the harsh conditions. The boss of these 2 explorers, who is implied to have some less than ethical work practices, and a seemingly ordinary man who the company has taken interest in. Personally, I quite like this method of introducing plot lines so early on, as the connections between them are clearly established from the moment that the characters are actually introduced, rather than ham-fistedly forcing them in at a later point in time. If you want to skip my explanation of the plot to avoid spoilers, if you want to buy this book, to allow yourself the luxury of reading it first, you can skip to the timestamp on the screen now to hear my spoiler-free review on whether or not I would recommend this book. So, starting things off strong, we find ourselves following two Arctic explorers, one called Alan and the other one doesn't get his name mentioned. Alan comes across as the more reactive type, displaying both anger and frustration at the lack of the results from their expeditions into this freezing wilderness they're trapped in. The nameless explorer, who I'm going to call Johnny from now on, just for ease of referencing, Johnny is generally perceived to be more fearful for the pair's safety, and speculates that they're going to freeze should they remain out much longer. But he remains hopeful that they'll uncover what they're looking for, despite disparaging comments from Alan. The two have a seemingly strong connection, which you'd assume, you would, if you were trapped in this Arctic wilderness with just you two for company. This is displayed by Alan cracking a few jokes and remarks at Johnny's expense, whilst Johnny shows severe discomfort when Alan lashes out at him in frustration after falling down a ledge. When Alan recovers after falling down this ledge, he remarks at how pointless the search is and that there's no evidence for the cave's existence. And this is the first mention of both the cave, other than obviously on the front cover, and also what it is they're actually looking for in this fucking awful barren wasteland. So just when Johnny is also ready to give up, despite his commitment to the cause, he spots something and demands that Alan turn around. And when Alan finally does, despite some initial resistances, they turn around and, sort of in a slightly cliche turn of events, them falling down the ledge actually turned out to be exactly what they needed to do to find what they were looking for. It led them right to the cave, which turns out to be this. Turns out to look exactly the same as this when they find it. There's 4 pillars just in the area before the cave with some runic looking symbols adorned upon it, and each of the pillars looks like it's got either an urn or a sort of helmet sort of shape on it. And then Alan calls his boss to let him know of the good news. So on the next page we turn to the perspective of the boss of a company called Goyle Co. He receives a call from his explorers and he remarks, "It begins," a fitting callback to the words on the cover. What will begin exactly isn't crystal clear, even still, though it's definitely connected to the cave, this company called Goyle Co., and the man on the cover in the wide-brimmed hat. He calls a company meeting, telling his fellow co-workers of the company's grand success in their discovery of the cave, and he remarks that this is a new direction for their company. He acknowledges that this isn't their usual style of business, but it has definitely paid off now that they have this discovery. The boss, who we later find out to be called Martin, explains to the audience, us reading the book, and also his co-workers, that press coverage of actions taken within Goyle Co. haven't exactly been in their favour or very savoury at all, really. And it even goes so far that members of the company themselves are even doubting what's going on. And we see this through the eyes of someone called Mr. Montana, who is sat at the board meeting with them, and he scorns this sort of success that Goyle Co. has had with finding the cave. Martin asks him to speak up about this and express what he believes is going wrong, but Mr. Montana knows better than to open his mouth and to question the methods. So, just as an aside note, aside from the actual relevance to the company, Mr. Montana is obviously I say obviously. If you've watched Ryan's channel, there is a character called Michael Montana, who is an internet star. So that's just a little Easter egg, I guess. It's quite an obvious one. I would expect that there's more that I just haven't found in my reading of it. So Martin, the boss, reflects on how the company was created many years ago and is now internationally renowned, though he emphasizes that it is important for a company to change, which, you know, obviously it is. You can't remain stuck in your ways, but I feel like he is going about it definitely in the wrong way. There's change and then there's sabotage. And he ultimately comes to the conclusion that power, creative power, is what is needed to survive and to get anything done in this world. He makes reference to what he refers to as an unawakened power, which is now amongst them due to the discovery of the cave. He's somehow going to harness this energy, this power, and use it for his own intentions and for Goyle Co. The meeting closes. Martin calls an agent, and we actually find out that the agent is the guy on the front cover. He's called Mark, and he's set to intercept the roommate of someone the company has their eye on. So Martin clearly distrusts Mark to complete this job without being, not an idiot, but without being destructive towards the best interests of the company. And when he finds out that there's no CCTV of what is actually going on between Mark and this roommate character, he is very annoyed. So following this call, we actually cut to just a living room with a guy on a couch watching a superhero show called The Cat. And this is my favourite quote in the entire book. And the eponymous hero of the show, The Cat, says, "I've had it up to here with these bloody terrorists." I just really like that quote. It's got a lot of good energy to it. So the man's roommate comes in. We find out he's called Art. We found out the other man watching the show is called Kyle. And they engage in some friendly conversation about noises last night, the woman upstairs. So, in my opinion, the characters of Art and Kyle seem to be at least loosely based off Jack and Ryan themselves. The connection between Art and Jack is kind of tenuous at best. They remind me of each other in a sort of personality way, but there's not actually much linking them. But then with Kyle and Ryan, there is a definite link, because I know what Ryan's like about viewing movies as an art form. He just reminds me of him, especially in looks as well. I'll put a picture of Kyle up, and I'll put a picture of Ryan up. Tell me these are not the same person. You can't deny it. They're absolutely the same person. Kyle adamantly defends the cartoon that he's watching when Art refers to it as a kid's show, and despite him trying to get into it, Art leaves for a stroll, and he bumps into Mark, who is very shifty looking, who is just peeking at him around a corner. Mark attempts to get Art to lead him to Kyle, but obviously you're not going to invite this weird, shifty looking man back to your apartment. You don't know his name at this point. Art objects like a normal person, and then Mark shows him his gun, and he quickly changes his mind and decides that it will be okay to take this armed man to their apartment. I don't have an issue with that, because, you know, I would cooperate with someone with a gun as well. So Art is aware of Goyle Co. This tells us that the Arctic expedition is public knowledge, although maybe the purpose of it is obviously remaining hidden, because if the whole world knew about the cave and whatever was in it, people would probably be looking for it a bit more than just Goyle Co. So Art's leading them back to the house, presumably towards the shared house or apartment that they live in, and he tries to engage in conversation, but Mark acknowledges that this is just to do with the fact that Art is very nervous of this interaction. And then there's a strange transition where Mark's face slowly becomes transparent and distorts. and the voice of Art saying Mark is like all fucked up. It fades into a like a shifting black background, and there's eerie high-pitched noises, and the panels come back to Mark after a little minute from the void, and there's a wind-like noise coming from seemingly nowhere. I don't know if it's in his mind or if he's having a vision or if he's like thinking back to something, but Mark sees the cave, this image of the cave again. There is some sort of face, I think. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it looks like a face. We get slightly closer to the cave, and then the panels switch to a robot creature, which is balancing on a single wheel in an otherworldly landscape, to say the very least. The comic ends with this view, and it leaves you with a sense of unease. Like, what has truly occurred to take the reader, or Mark, to this place? I should also say that the slim robot character is another reference to something that Ryan has made. It was a piece of art, and I wanted to buy it off him, but it had already been sold, sadly. But it was a really cool piece of art, and I'm glad that he's incorporated that into the story, though we're yet to see what significance it has. So now that we've ran down the plot, I've got a lot of stuff to say just about the comic in general. As I previously mentioned, I really like how this pilot opens up several different plot lines. Each one are quite intriguing. There's a lot of questions involved, like what's in the cave, how's Kyle involved with the discovery, what purpose will he serve once Mark actually gets to speak to him, will Martin's distrust of Mark affect the efficiency of working together, does Mr. Montana have more of a role to play as being a disruptive factor in the company's workings, why did Mark appear to have a vision of the cave, is he connected to it in some way, what is the dormant power in the cave, will it happily work with Goyleco, or will it resist the attempt to integrate with the business? As you can see, there is countless questions about what could happen in the future issues of this comic. And I think that's one of the strongest points about this first issue. There's so much set up on how things could potentially happen. The plot lines don't feel isolated, they're well connected, they're intertwined with one another, with mysterious connections that we aren't fully familiar with, even though there's a transition between each one that's quite seamless. My only concern with such a strong start is the follow-through, obviously. Will the two writers, Ryan and Jack, be able to pull off a satisfying continuation and eventual conclusion to these well-woven storylines? In my personal opinion, I would argue yes, they can definitely do this. This is only due to my personal knowledge of other projects that the two have worked on in the past, particularly in the form of YouTube video narratives. And I've had enough practice in this department that I'm confident that there will be a very consistent sense of complexity throughout each issue. Art style is obviously something that should definitely be discussed, as this is a comic, a visual medium. Despite only being drawn by a single artist, there's no lapse in quality throughout the entire thing. I can't imagine where he finds the motivation to do this, or the continued talent. Whilst there's no colour in the actual, like inside the comic, it's totally black and white. Shading is used effectively to convey certain atmospheres and moods that would otherwise be taken out through use of colour. For example, in the Arctic wastelands, with the whole landscape being white in hue, you get a sense of hopelessness seeing the tiny silhouettes of the two explorers wandering around in this vast emptiness. Yet again, in the first interaction between Art and Mark, the fear that is evidently flowing through Art is quite literally drawn on his face. The shadows that crowd his features give a feeling that he's being boxed into a corner by the imposing figure of Mark, who is illustrated to appear to be towering over Art, despite looking to be actually decently shorter than him in normal conversation. The figure and emotions evoked by a shady character such as Mark are almost universal, with fear and caution being obvious things to approach this character with. The perspectives used during the meeting scene with Martin the boss are particularly well done by Ryan, emphasizing the emotions that Martin is exhibiting during his presentation to his fellows. There are even several panels where Martin's eyes are completely blacked out, adding to a growing sense of almost maliciousness in Martin that we as the reader may interpret as evil intentions for Kyle and the cave itself. One of my favourite panels in the entire comic is this one. Something about how the explorer's face contorts the fabric of the mask really resonates with me, and the wide staring lens of the eye protection makes this image fascinating to look at. I love the attention to detail in the outfits of the characters, with the fuzzy lining of his winter hood being well textured and almost lifelike for a drawn image. An equally important part of a comic structure is the dialogue and writing. The story is conveyed mostly to the reader through the actions of characters, such as that the boss not exactly being a reputable person, or Kyle being crucial to the continued plans of Goilco. Some things are directly explained to the reader, which could be seen as a downfall of the comic genre in general, rather than a personal gripe with this comic in particular. Without the aid of a moving picture, it seems much harder to follow the adage of show don't tell. Perhaps more information about the cave's importance could be conveyed through the use of data and charts in the next issue. With the discovery and obviously subsequent investigation of the cave that will clearly take place, I think that more subtle details about the cave could be given to an attentive reader through background details. I also feel that the comic could benefit from small text cards at the bottom of frames from time to time, though perhaps this was avoided to allow the comic to flow between characters better. Dialogue between characters that have personal friendship, such as the two explorers or between the roommates, flows very well, coming across actually how real people would react in given circumstances. The interactions between Art and Mark are also well written, even displaying the nervous disposition of Art, down to the inane questions that begin coming from Art's mouth to offer to keep away the awkward silence of the walk home. Unfortunately, Martin's conversations with most people are the most cliche of the entire comic. Evil businessman is evil type stuff. In fairness, I think that this is quite true to life as well. I cannot reasonably imagine a corrupt businessman to act in ways that are completely alternate to this representation. Wait, no. Hopefully there turns out to be more than a seemingly well played out brand of character than initially meets the reader's eye. In conclusion, I believe that the narrative and natural intrigue of the situation the characters find themselves in are what is issue 1 of the cave's finest qualities. Artwork and illustrations are also heavily detailed and well designed, with the font style used at certain times even reflecting the mood of the scene. The dialogue can be cliched at times, especially when the character of Martin is speaking, though his relation to his underlings and associates are arguably some of the ones that I am looking forward to being progressed the most, and hopefully will be taken in some unexpected directions. For the price of this book, being only £3, from the online store with no delivery cost, this is a very strong beginning to a story that will hopefully span several issues and will only get better as time goes on. Maybe it's my bias as someone who has read relatively few comics over the course of my life, but I would regard this as one of the most promising starts to a series I have seen so far. To place this on a scale out of 10, I can confidently give issue 1 of The Cave a strong 8.5 out of 10. Character introductions were virtually flawless, and scenery, especially in the areas involving the cave and the outside shots of Goilco, were jam-packed with details that were delightful to look at. With very few recommendations for change from myself, I can envision this story sweeping me off my feet with unfamiliar environments and abstract concepts as we descend deeper into the cave. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. There will be a link to Ryan and Jack's store page for the comic in the description below. I've been Sat in Armchair. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.